Welcome back to Season 6 of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast, brought to you by Polaris Healthcare Partners, where we leverage decades of healthcare and business experience to drive growth in successful group practices just like yours. If you're a healthcare entrepreneur and you're interested in building, scaling, or exiting your group practice, you've found not only the industry's leading resource for business education, but a team of trusted advisors dedicated to helping you achieve and exceed your goals. In short, the team at Polaris creates clarity, confidence, and results. I'm your host, Jamie Falash, and the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast is on the air. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today because we have a special episode for you. So today is the 300th episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast, and we're really excited because that means 6 years of an episode every Thursday, all designed to bring you the resources and to answer questions that you need as a founder and provider in the healthcare space. So today, we're going to do two things. First, I'm going to welcome you to my patio here in Arizona where it's nice and warm. Secondly, we're going to talk about maybe the most common questions that we get, and we want to group those together. So I pulled a bunch of clips for you today to help answer that question. And what is that? That question centers around exit. Now, a lot of founders want to know, what should I be thinking about when I'm ready to exit? Does that mean early 2027? Does that mean 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? This should all be in a well thought out strategic plan. And maybe that time frame changes for you based on other factors. So let's start by providing you with some resources from past episodes that I pulled over the last 2 years that might help answer some of the most burning questions that you have in terms of what do I need to think about for my exit? So let's go inside, cool off, and enjoy some of these clips. Let's talk about the market first. How about that? Can you tell us what the market in 2026 looks like currently?
Yeah. So I think going back to our other previous podcast, 2025 was a very overall conservative market position. And, partly because it was just coming back from the 23-24 SOFR conditions. They were slowly declining. There were still good valuations, still the deals done in 2025. But 2026, the floodgates almost have opened up.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of energy around deploying cash dollars for the right assets. A lot of companies are focused on growth. We talked in another podcast. Some of the bigger DSOs might be converging in the next 12 to 24 months, and some will go for recapitalization. Unfortunately, the last 2 years maybe didn't produce the best recapitalization terms for a lot of the DSOs. So there's tremendous energy in 2026 to look for good assets, and all the deals we've taken to market, we've seen multiple letters of intent, and valuations come in not where 2021 was. I think I've said that before. It's not going to be what it was, but fairly close to it. But the deal structures are a lot more attractive than they were back in 2021.
But before we do that, let's address for our newer subscribers and maybe a recap for listeners that have been with us the full 4+ years. What tools do we have in our toolbox to get people prepared for a sale, or even if you want to hang on to the business, even if this is a legacy business? And more importantly, why is that valuable?
So, for our audience members, we do have a transaction advisory and growth strategy consulting, right? Either way, we want to build a business to sell and or carry on a legacy. So some of our audience members may be thinking, say, I want to build this business and I want to create generational wealth. And generational wealth may not mean transacting to a strategic or private equity. They may mean I want to hand this out to my family members. There's nothing wrong with that, right? We want to help them build a business that is running independent of them, that continues to grow around it, right? So they might be going from 5 to 15 to 25 to 50 locations. And so that's the kind of business we want to help them do it. But in the same context, that is a business built to sell, because that makes it really attractive from a buyer's lens, because now that business has an identity, has patient care values, has created the right culture with providers, and has a vision that is allowed to grow, right? So, when we take a business to market, what makes us unique is we do all the diligence in-house. We don't outsource it. And we create a pitch book or a SIM ourselves. And then depending on the size of transaction, it's very important is we do outsource a sell side quality of earnings. So a lot of different firms will do a quality of earnings, but that quality of earnings is in-house. Okay. That's not a quality of earnings. It has to be an outsource. It has to be a third party CPA. And that ensures a defensible position going to market.
Now, let's talk about some of the discount that you mentioned in your article. Being prepared versus the discount that a buyer is going to place on some of these things, because they're all things that they've got to fix. And we would rather have you come to us or a consultant to help operationally fix the business, clinically fix the business. And when I say fix, I mean, let's work on developing it to where the value is where you want it to be. So maybe let's go into a little bit of what you would get in terms of a preparation premium, I believe you called it, versus the discounts from diligence that will take place in a sale.
Sure. So I think in that aspect there, if you don't have one, the other is the inverse, right? So I think that's kind of like what I talk about in the article. One is having clean financials as you're going to market, defensible financials, so I think we've talked about it on our previous podcast that at some level we typically do a QOV.
Right.
We outsource a QOV. So I just want to make sure that a QOV is not done by an advisory firm. We do a financial diligence and then we outsource a QOV to a third party firm. So before we even do outsource QOV, we want to work with our clients to make sure we have clean defensible financials, working with their in-house accounting firm or their accounting firm that they have. So clean defensible financials, because that's going to be important. And, one of the other things we're also looking for is that the team culturally is aligned and believes in the philosophy and the missions of the business. And I think these are things that are going to provide confidence from a buyer's lens. And it's going to allow them to say, okay, I can come in and, 30 days before closing, when they're doing the integration meeting, they can come in and take over the business, fairly quickly day one. Right. I think those are things that they're going to talk about. And also, typically when you see a business that has clean financials, they tend to have more documented processes and they tend to be tracking, have some kind of a KPI tool where they can understand where their KPIs are in their business and they can map out where they're headed within their business. Right. And
I want to take it from a different perspective today. Providing partnership, or let me break that down a little bit. Partnership meaning equity, buy-in, earned in, equity for your providers and maybe executives. We know through our experience that it can really drive a higher value of your business now and at exit. So I want to start with that. I want to get your thoughts.
Yes, people are, as you said, a year or 10 years out from an exit. Bringing in shareholders early and the right shareholders on, it's important for the continuity of that business. One, if it's going to be an internal transaction, it allows, if there's already some meaningful shareholders within the business that are minority at some level, allows for internal transaction to happen, a much favorable lending process. But if you're running a process to bring in a third party or strategic or financial sponsor, one of the number one questions we see in a pitch book question is, who are the partners in the business besides the principal, or what percentage of ownership do they have?
Yeah.
And in this transaction, will there be some kind of a waterfall to additional, junior doctors or executive team members, depending on the size of the platform that is there? I think a lot of people are looking at continuity of care. A lot of businesses that entered that did not think about those issues coming out of 19 or 20 or 21, that are those businesses that are already sponsors are having to work through those challenges today. And when they're potentially thinking of having an exit, and you see more and more larger MSOs and DSOs start to set up a partnership plan, because one, they're having those internal same challenges that you might have 2 locations or 10 locations, which is doctor continuity. And two, when they're thinking of their exit process at a larger platform level, they're having to consider those same things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we can even take a step back and say that we know plenty of doctors who are successful in their own right, and they have not offered partnership. They're still successful. That's okay. Maybe that's been your path. But what we also know is that it does drive, it does motivate, and that becomes a natural progression. You brought up a minute ago buyer appetite, and I know that buyers have gotten really selective. We saw a lot more activity for different reasons back in 2021, that time frame. However, we know that buyers' behavior has changed a bit. Can you address some of the risk factors that owners need to consider when they're selling that might affect buyer appetite?
Yeah, so diligence is meaningfully different today than it was 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad. I want to say that it's good for the industry for the diligence to be a little more judicious, more conservative, more thoughtful in how people are partnering up with doctors. So in that aspect, the buyer appetite is, one would call it more conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But what they're really looking for is good partners and good assets.
Okay.
And if you can find a good partner and a good asset, you are getting premium valuation on those deals. Okay. Another aspect to think about that is in that diligence when buyers are doing is the business that they're partnering up with, is it at max capacity or is it at 75%?
Yeah.
Okay. And businesses that have achieved maximum capacity tend to not get the best valuations, because it's maximized its full potential. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be no different than on a general dentistry business. If you had a practice doing $2.2 million, okay, 6 chairs, would you want to buy a 6 chair practice doing 2.2 million? Or would you want to buy a 6 chair practice doing 1.5 million? What is more attractive to you? I think those same fundamentals come into play.
Well, just being organized and, like you said, thinking ahead, thinking out 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the road about what you want for your business and setting it up in a professional manner, showing future employees when you're interviewing them, when you're talking about having them on board, when you're talking about offering equity, that you've already thought through all of this stuff. Like, look at what that does just for a recruitment perspective.
Many of the groups we've laid out the program for have pitch decks already built out.
That's perfect.
That allows them to say, not only here's our clinical practice, here's our vision for the next 5 years, but here's our partnership track, right? And that really differentiates them from the practice next door, that is out there. So I think that's a competitive edge to recruiting. And that translates into higher valuation organically because EBITDA tends to improve. And then when we go to market and the business is transacting, you have many shareholders in the business that are on the cap table, many minority shareholders, but many minority shareholders. And that becomes really exciting from a buyer's lens because now we can communicate. We have 3 partners, 15 partners, depending on the size of the business, that are moving forward as stakeholders in the business that have a vested interest of the ongoing journey of this business.
Because really, if we're asking that, should I exit or not, we're looking at probably 5 years down the road on your horizon line.
Yeah. What I always tell people is if you cannot exit a business, you do not have freedom, right? Even if you're so there's 2 components of freedom we're talking about. One is the ability to go vacation, which I think as you scale and you put in systems and processes in place, you replace yourself clinically within the practice and you can improve margins within a practice. Now you can create improvement EBITDA, pay yourself a salary and replace yourself in income, right? I think that's great, right? And then, we also, obviously, I would highly recommend some kind of a partnership track for doctors that allow them to realize some of the upside as they're growing and provides them the same security you're getting. Now, they want security that they're building something that they get to participate in. You want security that you're building something that you can go on vacation over, you have financial freedom from. So I think that's a win-win, right, in that aspect. Mm-hmm. So now we get to that. You built this $9-10 million revenue practice. So you're on track to continue to grow. How do you exit that business? And if you cannot exit that business, then you're tied to that business. Right. So I think it's important to think about what does exit look like for you? And a lot of people will say, well, when I want to exit, I want to walk away in 1 to 2 years. Well, that depends on what kind of valuation you're looking for, how the deal is going to be structured. So I think it's very important for people to start thinking about the business they're building, who the potential buyer is going to be up front. Okay. And it's okay if it's going to be their associates in an internal transaction. because that's okay. It's going to be a discounted valuation or a lower valuation. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're not discouraging that. I think people just need to be prepared for that. But if they're thinking of exiting to a third party and allowing an economic windfall for their associates and for themselves, that needs to be planned 5 to 7 years out, before transacting, because in most structures, the principal, even if they're clinically out of the shares, they're going to be looking at some kind of a rollover equity and some kind of a post-transaction agreement.
And we've talked a little bit about this sort of throughout the podcast today. What else can founders do to prepare right now for a future sale when it comes to their leases and that type of space?
A few things, right? Obviously have, number one, review their leases that they're looking at. But, if you have leases today, I think they typically tend to sit in a data room or a drawer, not being ever looked at, just like probably operating agreements for majority of principals. So, I always recommend look at that every a couple of years, if not every year, just to kind of refresh yourself on where you are. But yeah, look at those leases, look at the language in those leases, either go to your counsel or come to us and have us evaluate and say, hey, I'm thinking of going to market in 12 months or 5 years. How does this look? And one, we can look at it from a business lens. And if we need to involve counsel on a legal end, we can obviously involve counsel on a legal end to the extent that they can help you modify that lease, or a real estate expert that could be on the advisory side that could help you renegotiate that lease.
Speaking of exit, we know that when a business has equity participation, equity partners, that's way more attractive to buyers. Why is that?
Yeah, I think so. That's the number one issue that's coming up when we run processes is what percentage of owner are the 1 or 2 doctors or 5 doctors within the business. And 9 out of 10 businesses might have only 1 doctor, so 90+% owner, 100% owner.
Yeah.
And then some people might be in a partnership. So the question comes up, but what about the other 5 or 15 doctors or 20 doctors in the business? And again, you're not going to give every doctor equity because you're looking for that, the top 20 to 30% to provide equity to help, provide continuity of care to the platform.
Yeah.
So I think whenever they start looking at those things and say, okay, we have a lot of doctor partners in this practice, then they start to feel comfortable about continuity of care. If you have a large enough platform, doing 20 to 25 in revenue, and you start to give executives equity within your business, then it also shows to that platform that, hey, we have executive team members that are going to stay with the business, and I don't have to worry about anybody departing the business. So I have a little more security within the business. So I think that becomes another important aspect of it. So buyers want continuity of care and continuity of operations within the business. And being able to reflect in that pitch book that we have doctor partners at, every 1 location, every 3 locations. We have executive team members potentially, again, on the side. I'm not saying do this at 1 or 2 locations, but at a larger platform, an executive team member that has equity in the business, that allows us to articulate, okay, you're writing a check for, 20, 50, $100 million, and you have a team that goes with the business. You don't have to worry about 90-day termination clauses or 120-day termination clauses that people can provide you after the exit.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We work very hard here to make sure that we bring you resources to answer your questions and help support the growth of your business and the exit that you choose for your business. So don't forget to send us an idea if you'd like to hear about a topic that we haven't covered. Thanks again for being a loyal listener and subscriber. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a colleague and be sure to leave us a rating on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We'll see you on the next episode of the Group Practice Accelerator Podcast.